Welcome back to our special series on our new book, Speak Different. We have a special guest today. We'll get to that in a second. So hopefully you've listened to the episode with my sister-in-law, Jamie, where we talked about quotes, questions, stories, and statistics. If you haven't, head back and get to that one. But I'm really excited about our guest today. Her name is Eva Daniel, and I discovered her last summer. I was about to do a presentation for Microsoft. They wanted me to do a presentation where the whole presentation focused on just having a single idea for your presentation. And on LinkedIn, I came across these great quotes. I'll start with one of them. It says, "Every speech needs one clear, controlling idea." And then she said, "Tell them what you're saying and tell them in one sentence." And so I wrote it down on a little piece of paper and I put it in my notes so that I could include it in my presentation to Microsoft. And then every time I opened LinkedIn, she had something else cool to say and something else cool that really fit. And we're going to get into some of that today. So welcome, Eva. Tell us, how did you... So that's the introduction to the non-introduction. So one of the things we talk about in the book is you don't introduce yourself, you introduce yourself along the way. So you're going to learn about Eva along the way. I just told you a little bit about her, but we're going to jump straight into the one idea and you'll learn about Eva throughout this podcast. So Eva, tell us, how did you get to the point of it's got to be one idea, it's got to be in a sentence? How did you get, because some people will say it's three, some people say, sure, you've got a lot to cover. You're real strict with that. I'm real strict with that. How did you get to the point of telling people it's got to be one thing, it's got to be in one sentence?
Well, it's come through a series of working with different people. But years ago, I was working with a speaker and she was talking and she was going on and on and on and on and on. And she was sharing with me about how she has delivery challenges. It's the rambling, it's the rabbit trails. It's the story that it's a lot of build up for a lot without a lot of excitement or a lot of punch. And I said, okay, well, just bottom line, what are you trying to say in this speech? Like one sentence. And then that was a 5 to 6 minute answer. And so I said, no. What are you trying to say? Like in one clear, crisp, clean sentence. You're not trying to make it sound exciting.
Yeah.
You're not putting this on marketing materials. You're not dropping, this pithy line on a podcast. Just literally, what is your speech about?
Yeah.
And she couldn't get there. And it was that moment of kind of clarity for her. I don't actually know what my speech is about. But it's not just her. I mean, I see this all of the time. I can be guilty of this myself as a woman of many words who likes to make short stories long all of the time. I have made a career talking about talking, as have you.
Yeah.
We have a lot to say, but
Yeah.
are you being clear in what you're trying to say? So I always just encourage every single client that I work with to figure out, what are you trying to say? One clean, crisp, clear sentence. I want people to know there's 5 key elements to leadership, and they're this. Or I believe everyone should have confidence to walk into a room. That's your idea. But figuring out in the simplest one sentence, what is your communication? And I'm not even just saying speeches. I'm saying anything you're trying to communicate, newsletter, the LinkedIn post, social media posts, podcast. Before you go into anything that you're trying to create, what's the point?
Yeah.
Simplify it for yourself, because that acts as your North Star as the presenter of knowing, okay, regardless of all the other things I talk about, it's about one thing. And hopefully every single thing else you talk to points to that one idea. I mean, I can't tell you how many clients I've worked with who have these amazing, incredible opening stories that are funny and they take you on a journey. And then they're like bolted on. They don't have anything to do with where the speech is going.
Yeah,
but
now we're done with that.
There
Let's
wasn't
get
even
into
a
material.
recognition that had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
And so just being really clear on what are you trying to say?
How do you, okay, so that's perfect, because I think that's where we want to dig in a little more, because we kind of tell them do it and we give them some ways to do it. But it seems like there's either natural resistance or unconscious resistance. How do you overcome that with people that you've helped? Or, what are some actual practical things? They're like, okay, I want to simplify it. How do I do that? Do you have some steps you walk them through or questions you ask? How do you get somebody to their one thing when they don't have a one thing? I love the way she said, I don't even know what my speech is about. Because obviously, if you don't know, they won't know either, right? So you getting to that point of clarity is really important. But how do you get them to that one idea? How do you walk them through? Do you have a process, or is it different with every person? What are some things that have been successful for you?
Well, I wish I could just say, here's a 5-step linear
Yeah.
process, and then we all come to these, startling moments of clarity. For most of us, when it comes to really developing out our thought leadership, saying the things that only you can say, giving the speech that only you can give, it's not, it's, for most of us, it's been years of processing the world, your stories and your expertise and figuring out, hey, what are, my unique opinions on things. One thing that I encourage all of my clients to do, I have this whole hot takes exercise I walk them through. A hot take is just a strongly held opinion that you have about, well, you can have them about anything. But I always encourage my clients to figure out what are the hot takes that you have about your field or your industry or your topic. So when you think about it, so for example, as a public speaking coach, one of the hot takes I have is that you don't have a delivery problem, you have a content problem. I just shared
Mm,
kind of about that a minute ago. A lot of speech coaches would disagree with me. They're like, actually, it doesn't matter how good your content is, it's all about delivery. But one of my hot takes is you don't have delivery problems, a content problem. But figure out for you, what are 10 things that you believe about
mm,
your topic? And then don't worry about, again, making them sound exciting. You can do that. I think that's a really great thing to do, to come up with this kind of pithy, memorable quotes. You can be
right.
quotable about whether you're writing a book or giving that speech, but really figuring out what are your brand distinctions about just your own thought leadership. Because there's a lot of other content driven speech coaches that agree with me on that. But once I start compiling my other ones, like you should always eat potato chips before you speak, and I have a whole reason and a story for that. Um, or you need a framework, something sticky to hold your thoughts together. Once
Right.
I start compiling my 10 hot takes that I have about my field or industry, I start seeing what makes me unique. So it's a fun exercise I encourage my clients to do, kind of on the front end of working together, just figuring out, okay, how do you think differently about your field industry than the hundreds or even thousands of other people in it? So if you think about something like, the most iconic speakers, in the world, they all have strong opinions about what they speak about. You're not kind of like, oh, I wonder what, I worked for Dave Ramsey for years. Oh, I wonder what Dave Ramsey thinks about credit cards. You're not left wondering. Like, you know that he's going to pull a giant scissors from the stage and start chopping up
Right.
credit cards on the
Right.
stage. And so, but figuring out the greatest thought leaders in our culture are the ones who know who they are, what they believe, and how to communicate it. You can do that too, even if you're just trying to figure out how you can show up better with maybe a little bit more presence, a little bit more executive, presence at your Monday morning meeting. So this is not something for elite speakers to do. This is something that each of us can do to kind of start figuring out, okay, high level, what are some of those unique things that I believe? And then as far as distilling down to that one core idea, is figuring out, like, when I look at this list, when I think about all of my experiences, where life has brought me, what am I most passionate about sharing
Mm.
now? It's not forever. Sometimes people get, worried if they create a signature speech that, is this the only thing I can talk about the rest of my life? No, but it is good to start with, okay, here's the one topic I'm most passionate about in this season that I feel like I'm supposed to be talking about, and focus your time and energy into that.
Well, and maybe too, if you turn that into a speech or you build a framework around that and you almost check that off the list, then you can go do the next one and do the next one. But when you're trying to cram it all into the same speech, you almost don't have the freedom to start exploring that other idea in some kind of depth. That reminds me of one way I do it. One way I do it is I basically ask people, what's that thing that you're saying all the time, everywhere, at home, at work? What's
Mhm.
the advice you give the most often? What's the story you're telling all the time? What's the theme that keeps coming up in the way you communicate to people? You're always talking about hard work, or you're always talking about standing out, or you're always talking about something, right?
Yes.
Um, the one we use in the book that I like is the New York Times connections game. Like, people go, I got a lot to talk about. You go, that's fine, but the New York Times connection game is about finding the connections between, these 16 things. I'm like, just write out all the things you want to say, and that's fine, but look for the themes, right?
Exactly.
How do these things go
Brainstorm.
together?
A lot of time just starts with brainstorming, just getting all of those ideas out of your head onto whiteboard, piece of paper, Google Docs, sticky notes, and figuring out what is that common thread between my life experiences, my expertise, like what pops from that.
Yeah. When you're giving presentations, who are you? Do you have an audience you're presenting to most of the time, or is it worldwide variety? Who are you giving speeches to?
Yeah, so like I said, I love talking about talking. So I speak on speaking, which sounds so meta saying that out loud. I honestly, I work with a lot of teams. I have come alongside, I have a special kind of love of the nonprofit space because I worked for years in the nonprofit. So I love working with nonprofit teams as well, figuring out how, can we show up better in our storytelling? I mentioned a moment ago, I've made a career talking about talking. That always feels a little bit meta, just I come into I just feel that's what I talk about. So I give a lot of public speaking workshops. I work a lot with teams. I work a lot, especially with kind of executive teams, even smaller core groups of figuring out, hey, how do we show up better in our presentations? How do we show up better at those team meetings? So wide range of companies. I definitely have a love for nonprofits. I worked in the nonprofit space for many years and just love mission driven people who are passionate about their message. So a wide range. And then I also have a membership site in which I work with a lot of, so I also speak to speakers a fair amount as well. Talking about how do you create a signature speech? How do you give the speech that only you can give? So I also lean towards people that have an interest in becoming professional speakers, those aspiring professional speakers, those people that know I love this. I believe I have a message worth sharing. And how do I show up better in my content and also obviously delivery as well. I always say, delivering content are the two sides of the public speaking coin. I always focus first on your content because it's really hard to show up with confidence if you're not clear on what you're trying to say.
Yeah, I want to jump on that for a second because that reminds me of something. There's a lot of people, they talk about power poses and they talk about what you should be doing with your hands and where you should be moving on the stage. And I think all of those things are important. But one of my um, beliefs is if you're telling a story that's meaningful to you, your body knows what to do. Like, I almost don't cover any of that. I just basically say and I think this is sort of what you're saying, when the content makes sense to you and matters to you, is familiar to you and meaningful to you, your body knows what to do, right? Like right now, I'm not going, I think I'll rotate my hands out to the side. Like, but when you're telling bullet point 7 of something that somebody else wrote the speech for you, you stand like a robot because your body doesn't know what to do, right? Um, so I think that's a good point, and I didn't know that other people sort of believe that same thing because I do see so much about stand like if your body does this thing, it'll tell your mind you're more confident or whatever. I think the reverse is also true. If you're saying something you're confident in, your body will know how to represent that, right?
Well, I think there's a lot of that. I also think one of the greatest things holding people back is procrastination, waiting too long to work on the content and too long to practice the delivery. I cannot tell you, David, how many
Mm,
speakers I have worked with, professional speakers who make, upwards of even $1 million a year, where the
yeah,
very first time they're delivering a piece of newer content is in front of a live audience. And
sure.
that should never be the first time you're delivering it. I mean, even if you look at any of your favorite comedians,
Oh,
they are running their sets,
hundreds.
I live in the Nashville area and
Hmm.
Zanies is one of the, the local comedy
Yeah,
places. Nate Bargatze and, Dusty Slay and all of these people are there just on
yeah,
a Tuesday night trying out new things. Why? Because they want to see how it lands on a smaller audience before they take it, to one of their big
yeah,
arenas.
yeah,
But a lot of times when it comes to our own, one of the reasons why I believe people do get so nervous, there's obviously lots of reasons, but one reason is because the first time they're delivering it is in front of an audience. They haven't actually
right.
practiced it in front of real people for
Yeah,
feedback. Because,
yeah.
contrary to your popular opinion, giving it in front of your mirror to yourself on, the morning of the presentation is not the same as if 5 days, a week before, you'd run it through a speech
Right,
coach, you'd run it through a
right.
few people from your team. At minimum, you'd run it through, a spouse.
Yeah,
But so definitely thinking through, some of those things, I think we get tripped up thinking they're delivery challenges where maybe it's just a procrastination problem. And then
yeah,
maybe if you're running it through a little bit, you would get more natural at the content. Or maybe it is, because obviously body language does matter and there are tips and tricks that really can help. But a lot of the thing that helps the most is getting familiar with your content and making sure that you're saying it in a way that you would say it. The other
yeah.
thing, as a professional speechwriter, years of my career, what can happen is our written self, what looks so good on paper, that speech that was printed, would look amazing because it's that beautiful language and that flow. People don't talk like that.
No.
So don't write your speech like you would a resume. You didn't
Yeah.
facilitate or do whatever. So making sure that you don't get in the trap, which I see so many times of people writing out a speech that doesn't sound like them and speaks way more formally than they speak. And we all speak at different levels of formality. Some of us will say, I'm going to go to the store this afternoon. Others of us would say, I'm going to go to Kroger. But knowing which way you say it, and so
Yeah.
making sure that the way that even as you're writing it out, structuring out your thoughts, that you're not writing it the formal version of you, but the actual you that shows up on the stage.
Yeah, I had that happen in reverse. I thought I've done a 2-day training on this concept. I have all the material I need. I have a transcript from that training. I'll just edit the transcript and I have a book. And I started reading it and I'm like, I can't use any of this. This is absolute garbage and nonsense. And it's like rehabbing a house versus tearing it down and starting over. I'm like, you don't talk at all. It's not close. It's also really hard to memorize the exact words and all that kind of stuff, and that's a whole different problem. Do
Well,
you have
David, I have to ask you a quick question. Have you done
Yeah,
an audio version of your book as well?
not this one. Technology's gone far enough that we pushed a button and it automatically created
Oh, okay.
yeah. But for the other ones, yes.
Because
Yeah,
I was gonna say, I've also had clients who have written
yeah.
books who had the experience, they realize they can't say a key word that's in their book a lot. They just struggle, saying it. So that's always a
Well, it's
little tip.
hard
If
to
you're gonna
read.
write a book and read it, make sure you can say every word that
Well, you
you've
have to read
written.
it perfectly too, and if you make any mistakes, then the editing won't work, even if it makes sense. So sometimes you do say it more colloquially or more normally, and it's like that's not the way it was written. And the audio engineer needs to be able to tie it back to exactly the way it's written. It's a mess. I don't like it. What helped with the last one is I co-wrote it with somebody. So he'd read a chapter, I'd read a chapter, he'd read a chapter. So that break in between was really helpful. Do you have an example of a one sentence that you've used for some of your speeches? Like, do you have this, when I talk to these people, this is my one sentence, or I don't want to put you on the spot, but when I talk to these people, I use this one sentence. Do you have any examples from your own or from somebody you've coached where you got them to a really nice, here was their one thing?
Well, an example I like to give years ago, I was working with an author and speaker by the name of Christy Wright, and she had written a whole book about time management and figuring out, the seasons of life and how do you prioritize what and when, and you can never achieve balance, but what does that look like? And we kind of really distilled the whole book and the whole speech down to what's right now. Just a simple
Mm,
question, what's right now?
mm.
And it kind of became this sticky phrase that was used all throughout that speech. And really, those 4 words really showcase the whole book and the
Yeah.
message. Is there a lot more depth? Yes. Are there strategies and principles and frameworks within it? Absolutely. But that's the one that really pops to mind that I feel like worked really effectively.
Yeah, I like that because that's a question too. So we talk about like one of the things we did a road trip last year, Stan Phelps and I, my co-author on this, and we were actually talking about this book before it was a book. We were doing one on presentation skills for the American Marketing Association in Houston, and we're on a road trip, and so we're just seeing all these billboards. And what I realize is billboards really get it, right? The good ones, you only really get one idea. And so my favorite right now that I've seen a bunch, because I've been driving back and forth to Atlanta and to Charlotte on this same road. I live in Eastern North Carolina. It's in pain, call Shane. And it's just like, and
And
if you're
that
not
is
in pain, then you don't call Shane. I say questions remind people that they need what you have, or it sort of selects, right? How many of you have ever been frustrated because, whatever, and people raise their hand, you go, okay, I can help you with that, right? It allows people to say, oh yeah, I've been looking at my phone, so I don't actively think about needing that. But yeah, when you mention it, I do really, care about this or need this. So questions are really great because they get a response from people. And I never thought about your one thing being a question.
Yeah, it really
Um,
can be.
but I really like that. Yeah. Well, and it kind of answers a question, which is the right thing, or it kind of makes a statement. The right thing is sort of determined by right now, right? It might change in the future.
Yeah,
The right
it
way
can
for you
be
to
on
spend
either.
your time.
seasons change. You had all these
Yeah.
big audacious goals for the year, and then you have an aging parent who got sick, or you
Yeah.
had all these big plans, and then you got sick, or
Yeah.
something changed, or you lost your job. Well, the season changed, so maybe what you thought the season was going to look like is different. So
Yeah. I used to read a bunch of Stephen Covey stuff and a bunch of time management stuff, and they made that point really well. His daughter had just had a baby and was dealing with the newborn phase and stuff like that. But, he teaches it all about balance and physical and emotional and social and mental and be reading and be connecting with people and all this. And he's like, a balanced life is unbalanced sometimes, right? Eh,
yeah,
that's the balance. The balance is when you have a newborn, you spend more time. We're empty nesters now, my wife and I, and that's why I'm golfing more,
you're like the
right?
promised land. You're just
Yeah. But when it wasn't, I literally took 25 years off of golf. Golf wasn't part of my life for 25 years because I was doing something that was important at that time. And now my life is super unbalanced towards golf because I have the opportunity to do something I didn't have time to do for that other time. So the thing that reminded me I needed to have you on the podcast was um, I saw a LinkedIn post from you, and I'll pull it up here so I don't forget it. We
it
talk in
always
the
makes
book
me
about,
nervous when they're quoted back something they wrote. Like, oh, let's see what you're going to pull out here.
no, it's not even a quote. It's like a little chart, but we talk in the book. Once you have your one idea, you can talk about 100 things. They just need to have that one idea to direct them, right? And
No, that
then,
needs to be the thread back to that
yeah,
whole idea.
yeah,
Thing I shared of sometimes people have amazing opening stories that are bolted on.
right,
Whatever that one big idea is, this is what's weaved throughout your
yeah.
speech.
Yeah. And so the way we say our one thing, which I've used for a 2-day training, which we use for the entire book, is persuasive presenters tell powerful stories that reinforce a single idea. And so the
Yeah, that's great.
reinforcing is with frameworks, right? One of the ways you reinforce, we use the analogy of concrete. When you just have concrete, it's a little bit brittle and crumbly. As soon as you put steel reinforcement bars in it, I think the strength increases by like 200%. It's some crazy number, right? It's
Yeah.
just, and if you've ever tried to break up concrete that isn't reinforced, it's pretty easy. You can do it with a sledgehammer. If you have a jackhammer and you try to break up reinforced steel concrete, it just take you forever. You're just taking it off piece by piece. It just doesn't come apart. And so the reinforcement is really crucial. Once you know, what am I talking about? What's my one simple idea? Now you need a framework where you walk people through. So if you want to know what's right now, the first thing you need to know is this. You need some kind of structure. And
Mhm.
so we talk about having frameworks in the book. But what I liked about your post is you posted that there's 6 frameworks for organizing your talk. So the first one was a principle or a theory. The second one was the linear path, which is kind of what we just talked about, step-by-step instructions. You said there's the Venn diagram, the grid or the axis. Number 5 is the acronym, and number 6 is the flywheel. So I thought for the rest of our time, you don't have to cover every single one of those if you don't want to, but can you tell us a little more? Where did you come up with those categories? What are some of the different times? I know there's some sub explanations in there that you could do for us. What are the times that you might use those? If someone's looking for a framework or trying to decide how to, okay, I got my idea, Eva. What do I do now?
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about those different types of frameworks, when you might use them, how to use them, mistakes people make with it, whatever. I'll kind of leave that open for you.
Absolutely. Well, I first kind of became obsessed with this idea of
I
frameworks.
like
When I
obsessed. I
first
like
started my
that.
own business 4 years ago, I was meeting, everybody's sort of like when you decide to quit your job and start your own business. I have 4 kids, my husband's stay-at-home dad. I knew I had like a couple months with like $3,000 a month coming in, which is not enough for the Nashville area for a family of 6. So
That's
one of
not
my
enough for a
neighbors,
lot of
one of my
areas.
neighbors, my older neighbor, he's in his 80s. We're chatting about this. He's very clearly worried with me. And he's like, hey, you need to meet up with my friend Steve. Like, he's a business coach. He'll just give you a free session. And so I
Yeah.
met up with this, wonderful speaker, author himself. And so we're meeting just kind of some business advice. And he said, hey, Eva, the sooner you can figure out your system, strategy, or framework, the stronger your brand and business will be. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And he goes, well, like, the Eva Daniel method of speaking, whatever it is. So
Mm,
instead of just being, here's a method of speaking, being like, hey, this is my method and here's how it works.
yeah.
So that's kind of what initially prompted it. And then, of course, it's not that I hadn't noticed and seen frameworks or strategies or structures before. I was in radio for 15 years, radio podcasting world, and then speechwriter. So obviously I'd written many talks that had these frameworks, but I started kind of really going like, okay, well, what makes some ideas sticky, what makes some speeches memorable,
Yeah.
and what makes them just kind of like meh or forgetful,
Yeah.
and how do people bucket and make their information? And so you saw my post with six. I would actually argue it's kind of almost limitless. It's almost there can be
Sure.
pyramids, there can be cylinders, there can be, so
Yeah.
it's both the words you're using and also the visual way that you're representing your information. I'm not a designer. No one wants me to design anything that they do. But it shows up both in our writing and also visually. And so these ones you tee down on is really thinking through your messaging and what you're trying to say and thinking through from the audience's perspective. We're assuming that everyone listening has already kind of done the work of figuring out, okay, who is my audience? What do I want them to know and
Mm,
feel and do? And, you've already done some of that brainstorming preliminary work. You hopefully already kind of even have that big idea. But then you're thinking through, okay, how am I communicating my content, my story, my expertise in a way that's packageable and memorable? I always like to give the analogy that you or I, we are both here today. Either one of us could give a great speech about habits. If you asked either one of us, like, "Hey, what are some good habits?" We've at least made it this far in our life. Do we have perfect habits? No, but we could give a speech on that. But
right.
James Clear was the one who came in and said, "Atomic habits. And this
Yeah.
is what it is." Ooh,
Yeah.
okay. Or anybody could kind of say, "Hey, comparison's really bad. We shouldn't compare ourselves to others." Well, Mel Robbins, the let them theory.
Right.
So the first one is really just that principle theory. We've already kind of talked about that sticky idea. I think that this sticky idea can be used in combination really well with other ones. Sometimes it's a sticky enough of idea that can just carry through the whole speech. Think Simon Sinek's start with why. But so when you're looking, you're trying to figure out, okay, wow, this framework concept is new, or I don't really know what mine is. Thinking through this sticky phrase, is it strong enough that really that is the whole principle that it stands alone? And it might
Mm,
be, especially if some speakers have very deeply personal um, stories, where the bulk of their keynote is a big overarching story. You might not need, and then the 5 steps of culture, that has to figure out something. You're actually just sharing your story.
yeah.
So principle theory can work really well. Just think of this as being the one liner that truly encompasses all of your ideas. Maybe though you have a message where you're really taking your audience on a journey. They start at A, they end at Z. It's a linear path where they're going from they start in one spot, and if they apply what you are suggesting, if they use your principles, they have this transformational thing, but it kind of moves in a linear fashion. They need to do A before they do B, before they do C, before they do D. They can't just jump to M and have the whole thing work out.
Yeah.
So one way to kind of determine a linear path, this one can work really well if you are having principles like think finances or weight loss. Dave Ramsey, who I used to
Baby
work with, his
steps.
7 baby steps. You can look at those 7 baby steps. You know which step you are on. You know if you're in
Yeah.
debt or if you're out of debt. You know what you're saving towards. So linear paths can work really well when you're taking someone on a journey. They're going from this spot to this, another spot.
Let me
Acronyms, that's
jump in
one.
there. Is
Yeah.
there when we talk about these, that's the one I think I use the most. My first book was The 4 Factors of Effective Leadership. And it was 2 levels. Each of the factors, you had to have an internal component before an interpersonal. So, for example,
Mhm.
you had to have self discipline before you could influence others. If you can't control yourself, how are you going to manage others, right? You have to be trustworthy before you can build trusting relationships. But also, you have to have self discipline before you're going to worry about integrity. If you can't have integrity if you don't have enough self discipline to to try to
Yeah.
manage yourself, right? So it was the 4 factors, but number 1 is before number 2. But once you've got trusting relationships, where are you going? Inspiration. There has to be some kind of destination. But once you're going there, you've got to get better. Okay, improvement. So, and then with freak factor, we talk them through. thinking differently, and we have acceptance and appreciation and awareness, and then we have acting differently, amplify and avoid and eliminate or align. And again, you're not going to behave differently about your strengths and weaknesses if you don't believe anything different about your strengths and weaknesses, right? So I've tended towards that, and I almost think of that more exclusively. Is there one that is kind of like the most common, or are these is there a million ways to do it and they're all fine? Because I do kind of think most of the time you're trying to kind of give them some kind of plan. Or if I get up there and go, you should all run a marathon and your life will be better. If I stop there,
we'd all know you're a liar because
well,
we'd be
yeah.
better off.
But then people go, okay, if I believe, it's like, I think that's like the why to how. If I get you to believe why, then at some point you're going to go, well, how do I do that? And almost all the time, the process is somewhat linear. Is there one that's more common or more useful or more basic? Like if someone's just getting started, should everybody start with the step-by-step, or did I just happen to do that and you can really start anywhere and it'll work, it'll be effective?
Well, I think one of the biggest things to kind of answer that question is figuring out, again, looking at that brainstorm, looking at kind of where I'm taking my audience. Is there kind of like a linear path? Like, what would be the order? Just like if I was ordering these steps. So you just outlined it really well. It sounds like from your book of like, you really have to start here before you can go on to the next thing. Sometimes though, we talked a little bit about that linear path. Flywheel is one that I really like. So Jim Collins popularized this idea. It was like a little bit in his book, Good to Great. And then he actually built a whole, like additional, kind of like smaller book out of the whole concept. But the flywheel is momentum, is energy. It's something that you're going to revisit and go around and around again. So linear path can work pretty well if you're not going to keep returning back to A. Like if you're going from A to Z or A to D, it's something that you're not revisiting. It's sort of like you actually, to a degree, can arrive. To your marathon analogy, I stole a joke from someone else years ago that I ran 2 marathons in my first day, in one day, my first and my last, because marathon running is a lot of work. So, but I have, the thing about a marathon, it's like, if you follow the plan, like you run the marathon, you might choose to do another marathon and kind of start back over wherever you are.
But you did it.
But you actually have arrived. And so sometimes thinking through the linear path, is there a point that you arrive, or are you going to go back, to the beginning? But
and it occurs to me that that the flywheel is like an extension of the linear path, because you're going to do this, you're going to arrive back at the beginning sort of like stronger or different.
The flywheel, like in an ideal world, like it kind of, your wheel keeps getting bigger and bigger because of the self-awareness. I do this and then I change and they go through. Flywheel can be a really, really strong one for bucketing our content. I think the flywheel can also work very, very well when you think about momentum and each action kind of being strengthened by the previous action. So it's kind of like this continual movement, this energy. You're asking people, to move forward. So, an example of this would be, like Charles Duhigg in his book, he talks about the habit loop. So it's like, you have this routine that you're doing and then you get a reward and then it goes the cue, which goes back to the routine you're going through again and again. So thinking through, and then of course in his book, it's like, okay, how do we break that? And how do we, get off this thing? But thinking through it for you, is your content that you're trying to share your audience, is it movement, energy, momentum? Often I found that flywheels work really well when it comes to something like thinking company culture. You never necessarily arrive.
You're never done having a good culture.
At company culture. It's, you could kind of argue that your company's culture can ebb and flow based on seasonality, but it's something you're continually always working on. And if you get this one thing fixed, there's more than likely, another area. So I think flywheels for bucketing information can work really, really well when it's something that you never really arrive in, as this continual movement and energy towards.
That's what I realized with my 4 factors is improvement. Once you get to that level, well, now you're probably improving your self-discipline, and also you're probably improving your you know what I mean? And then you start over. How can I have even more integrity? How can I be even more inspiring, right? Like you could just keep going through the loop. I like that. And I think that's a helpful message in and of itself, right? Like you're never done, or this is an ongoing process, or.
Yeah, where some things like, again, the marathon, that's a linear path. I mean, you can't run a marathon, you can run a marathon.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that's, it's a little bit more. But the thing is, I want everybody to hear, don't get super stuck like over like, oh, brain crunching. Sometimes with these things, it's just figuring out also what feels natural to you.
Mm,
And again, from the stickiness factor, if you're at it as to be, on a podcast, instead of just being like, oh, well, David, you have lots of ideas. Tell us about them. It can be like, hey, you have this path you take people on. Tell us about that. Well, really, it
yeah.
gets down to step A or whatever, the thing is. I personally use acronyms and that's
Okay.
another framework. That's just spelling out a word. Usually you want to consider six letters or less, on your word, because you don't want to give yourself somebody supercalifragilisticexpialidocious too much. So
Right.
giving a short word that they can use. I like acronyms probably because I'm a word person. I love to write. And I also think acronyms can be a good way. It can kind of almost marry a little bit of the linear path concept because, things can kind of flow in that order, but it also, it can be easier for the audience to recall and remember because they're spelling a word. And so I personally use an acronym for how to write a speech using the word SPARK, and every
Oh,
letter of
yeah.
that stands for something. Other people, if you think about SMART goals, we've all heard about SMART goals.
Mm,
Now, some goal setting clients I've worked with, vehemently disagree that SMART goals aren't good. Regardless, most of us can probably recall SMART goals. Oh, it's specific and it's measurable, it's actionable. Even if you haven't heard that for a while,
right.
you can spell out what it is. But acronyms, I think, can be a really, I like acronyms myself. I think it can also kind of turn those kind of intangible ideas into like very kind of concrete steps. It can be linear because obviously we're spelling a word, but it can also be kind of a way to just bucket big ideas in. So
Yeah.
I love a great acronym
That's
for
what I was going to
clients.
ask. And it could be both, right? You could have linear steps that are also denoted by an
Yeah,
acronym, right? Like step one
absolutely.
is we kind of do that. We didn't actually do it. Well, we did it, I think, maybe sort of at the last minute, but we didn't really focus on it. We have persuasive presenters tell powerful stories that reinforce a single idea. Yeah. But we never really thought about doing an acronym for that. And right
It's not too
towards
late.
what?
It's not too late. Maybe
Well,
for the
no,
book, but for
well,
speaking on it.
well, no. So then we did. So right at the
Oh,
last minute, we did the chapters are focus, illustrate, reinforce, and engage, which spells fire, right? And then we started
yes.
looking at ways that you might spark something, which is actually something you used. So let's not skip over that. Your framework is, and that's perfect. We asked for like one example of a one
Yeah.
idea thing you have. One of your frameworks is Spark. So tell them what that stands for and how they could use that to put together a good speech.
Yeah, so Spark is the framework that I use with all of my clients and speak on. And so this is just how once you've done brainstorming and audience questions and figuring out, all of these frameworks and all of the things, this is just how you write and you organize the flow of your speech. S is story. Sometimes on a shorter presentation, a stat or startling statement, but usually story, diving right in with a cold open. P is for problem. What problem? Every speech solves a problem. What does yours solve?
Yep.
Making sure you built the case for your solutions before you rush to give them to the audience. This is, of course, where you layer in the problem, the stats, the resource, maybe more stories, more examples. A is for actions. That's where your framework drops into your speech. We all deal with this problem. Here are the actions that you need to take. Action or actions, depending on how long your speech is, depends on how long that section is.
Yeah.
R, resolve. This is really the check that I give for speakers. Is there anything, you want to land every plane that you launched in your speech? So that's just a question for
Mm,
you. Did I resolve everything I said it to do? If you're going to take Q&A from the audience, you're going to want to resolve the questions of your audience. You should take it there, not the end. You should never end your talk on a Q&A. And so you want to take it towards the end, but not on the end. You want to always own your ending. So you want to come out for that K, that knockout close. And
ooh,
so that's Spark, high level, and that's how we organize our speeches. And so,
yeah.
and it's been fascinating to me because I've been using this, for a while there. I was all over the place. I wasn't following the framework advice. And I was like, six things and AppScar, and I was trying all
Give a
these things. I didn't
disorganized
feel
speech about how
anything,
to give organized
um,
speeches.
yeah, so
Yeah.
there you go. But since I've been using Spark, I can't tell you how many people come back like, oh, I use your Spark method because it works, truncated a 3
Yeah.
minute team update. Well, then you make the short version.
Yeah.
It works for a 5-hour workshop.
Yeah.
So that's what I have chosen to do with my branding. And again, just because anybody listening, it's not like you're locked into like one framework forever, but start somewhere because it's far more stickier. If I'm podcast guesting and somebody says, "Oh, tell us about Spark," I can say, "Well, I think the thing that's most applicable for your audience today is really just the S. So let's camp out there."
Well, or even
It
what you
gives
just
me
did.
hooks
Yeah.
to be able to pull from it, and leave
Yeah.
some intriguing, pieces. So, and it's the same for anybody listening. It's instead of just being like, oh, well, you have some leadership, principles. It's, you have the Fantastic Five flywheeler. That's not
Yeah.
good,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like whatever
No,
you
I know what you
branded
mean.
it to
Yeah.
be, and then you can pull from those and even segment out that information, or even deep dive just one of the elements of your framework. I do encourage people, though, what you do not want to have within a speech is lists within lists within lists.
Mm,
So you don't want to have Spark and then the P has 5 things and then the R has 7 things. And then before we know it, you've
yeah.
confused your audience. So
Yeah.
again, back to that one sentence clarity that we started our discussion with today, making sure that everything points towards that can be really,
Yeah.
really helpful with your own information. But the thing about frameworks is, we discussed we discussed a few of the 6 that I've mentioned, but I've seen clients do all sorts of different ones. The idea here is just thinking through, how am I bucketing my information in a memorable way instead
Yeah.
of just being 3 things, 3 steps, 3 pillars. And, it's like, okay, is that the best way to communicate your information for that audience? Or is there a more interesting way to put it? And I also say, I don't believe that you should outsource your thought leadership to AI until you've had some time to think through, what do I think about this? What do I believe about this?
Yeah.
What are my stories? But once you get somewhere, like, let's just say, you want to use an acronym, and you're like looking at your brainstorm, and you're kind of like looking for themes, and you're like, okay, well, it's, I want people to, action and risk and, you know decide. ARD. Well, ARD isn't good. Like, that's not a good acronym. So, but then, no, that's a good
Yeah.
spot to say, "Hey, I'm trying to create an acronym with these 3 principles. What could be some alternative words, or what could be
Yeah.
some alternative ideas?" Or maybe realizing, "Oh, actually those maybe I have 3 ideas. Maybe I should create a Venn diagram because they all overlap." This is where AI can be such an accelerator tool.
Yeah.
And once you've done the work of the
Your work.
that
Yeah.
your work and figure out, what is it trying to say? Does, for mine, it's like I kind of wanted story, because I think the best closings for speeches are often stories. So when
Yeah.
I was looking at my own acronym, I was like, well, spars, I don't want people to start having fights. Like, that's not inspiring. Like, let's spars our talk. And I was like, okay, well,
Yeah.
story. And I was like, okay, but what we really want is a knockout close. Oh, spark.
Yeah.
Okay, that works.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes, you have to play around, and that's true with any framework. So one of my favorite things I get to do with clients, I call it a keynote catalyst, where we'll write a speech in a day, and we'll spend usually almost half the time of really working through this framework concept, because it is the most crucial part of any presentation. Is, what is a sticky, iconic, memorable thing? Everything else around that is really important. How we tell stories, and layering in humor and audience participation, and are we going to use props? All of those things are very important. But until you get that core central part, you're going to really struggle to create a speech that's remembered.
Yeah. So you said something. We only have a couple minutes left, so this would be a good thing to close with, because you talked about closing. You also said, start with a cold open. We talked about that at the beginning of this. Don't introduce yourself. Introduce yourself along the way. When I talk with clients that I'm coaching, I tell them, you've seen that movie where somebody gets shot in the head and falls to the ground, and everything goes black in the first 2 seconds, and then it says 5 years earlier, and you want to know what happened.
Yeah.
Um, and so I like just getting up there and just starting. We got on this one, and I just said, "Hey, I was doing this talk for Microsoft, and I saw some stuff from Eva, and I wanted to know more. And then after the book, we saw some other stuff, and I wanted her to come on to talk about frameworks." I didn't say, "My name is David, and there's this lady, and here's what she does." Uh, Tell us a little bit about, how people can do that, or some cool ways you've seen people do that. What are some either good ways to start or good ways to close? I even thought, as you said, comedians, we say in the book, comedians save their best joke for last, and their second best joke is the first one that they start with, because
Mm.
people remember the most what happens at the beginning and what happens at the end. And if you don't get people at the beginning, they never make it to the end. So, any tips you have for opening strong or closing strong as we close?
Well, absolutely. That cold open, like you just said, any of the best movies, your favorite movie more than likely started right in the center of the action. Oftentimes we're trying to include way too much on our stories. So just can I always give, my clients I didn't a little template. I didn't understand blank until blank happened. Those are not swear
Mm.
words, but just like I didn't understand this thing until this other thing happened. Because that more
Right.
than likely will kind of take you right to the center of the story.
Yeah.
That could be a really good spot to consider starting. I would actually
Yeah.
default say, how would I start in the middle of the action? And then
Hmm.
decide, okay, no, I actually need to start at the beginning, or oh, I need to start at the end and back.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I always say the more effective a cold open is the larger the audience, the more effective a cold open is.
Oh,
So if you're
okay.
speaking to 6 people, it might feel a little over the top to be like, "It was 1997." People will be like, "We were literally just having coffee in the lobby. Like, what are you doing?" Like, again, to the authenticity. But if you're speaking to 3, 4, 5,000 people coming right out from the introduction, don't waste on the pleasantries of, "Oh, it's so great to be here, and when David invited me," and just go, then it was 1997. It's gonna be like,
Yeah.
"Whoa, everybody's pulled in." So
Yeah.
I do love just starting with a cold open, think what is the center of the story. In terms of closing, you want to own your ending. It is the last impression your audience will have of you. So you never want to give that closing, the power of that ending over to a stranger with a mic, which is why you should never end on a Q&A. Love Q&A.
Yeah.
Take it, engage, have it, but don't end on it. Instead, come back with something memorable. I often say that, book ending that opening story, introducing a new
Mm.
powerful story.
Hmm.
Um, looking at if you are in the nonprofit space or if your speech is a little bit more about casting vision, cast that vision for us. What world do you imagine? I
Mm.
imagine a world in which dot, dot, dot. What world
Yeah.
do you imagine? I'm not saying in like 2 months from now, it could be that. But in 5
Yeah.
years from now, 50 years, 100 years from now, when we're all dead and gone, tell us about
Yeah.
that vision. Tell us about that future.
Yeah.
Again, if you're giving a Monday morning staff update, might be a little over the top to end that big, but making sure that you're ending on something powerful, memorable, could be an inspiring quote. It could be again, a bookended story. There's a lot of options there, but the biggest thing is that you have a closing. It's not just, well, today we talked
Thank
about,
you.
1, 2, 3, and well, yeah,
Yeah.
that's not a closing, that's a summary of your talk. Instead, come
Yeah.
back with something interesting and memorable.
Yeah, that makes me think about if it's a small group, I really like starting with a question that you don't want people to just raise their hand to. You want them to actually answer, right? And you create some kind of discussion. But I also think you could start with a story. Maybe it's a customer story, right? Last week, we had this really big win with one of our customers, and Susan over here on the left, she really did an amazing job. And I want to tell you about that. And then you tell the story.
Yeah.
And to your point, I like that going back to it. Then when you close, you say, now remember what happened with that new customer that Susan helped us get last week and how we really made a difference with them. That's what we're looking to do this week. When you're working this week, remember that story about Susan and our new customer and go out and do those things. That wraps the whole thing together, reminds them about it, and gets them moving in a direction. So, anything, we're at the end, anything you want to tell us? I should have asked, anything that you want to say, anything that I missed, anything that you love to tell your clients, or that you think is super important when it comes to speaking, you want to leave us with?
I think the biggest thing is to start getting more of your ideas out there. What can happen is we can just overthink. There's a
Mm.
great meme, I am overthinking about overthinking again, with a woman like, lying on a couch. But I
Yeah.
do think this, and I'm speaking to myself here, as a business owner for 4 years, running my own business. Sometimes we can overthink and overthink. Just put your ideas out in the world. Post that framework idea on LinkedIn, share it with a friend at coffee,
Yeah.
get out of your head and take action, because that's one of the best ways to figure out, okay, what resonates, what's clicked. So even on this, framework discussion we've had, you might think, oh my goodness, it is, the word is going to be cuff. That's my acronym. It's cuff and it's going to be
Yeah.
awesome. And then you realize like people keep mishearing you, or it's just not working, or the you is weird and that's not really what you're trying to convey.
Yeah.
So speeches and speaking, it's a living, breathing thing. I am a big fan of developing that signature speech that ideally you can give a version of, 80% from event to event that you personalize the rest.
Yeah.
But speeches are living and breathing. You are too. You can change your ideas, you can change your thoughts, you can grow and you can advance and you can develop it out. So try it, get it out there, and here's to better speeches and speaking for all of us.
I love it. That reminds me of a story. I was coaching this lady, and she had she had a framework, but it wasn't a good acronym. And she tried, and I told her she should try, and she had tried, and there was just no fixing it. And so she just makes it funny, and she goes, "So I put a lot of time and effort into this, and I've come up with cacao," and like. And everybody laughs just like you did. And
Right,
it's great.
exactly.
She had, I mean, it's the imperfections. She has an acronym because she doesn't have an acronym, and she just owns it. And it's funny, but then it's memorable more than just going, so it's CCO or whatever it turned out to be. Right. And so she just made it fun. She made it funny. Well, Eva, thank you so much. You've helped me. You helped me with my Microsoft talk. You gave me some great quotes, questions, stories, and statistics. I love that you're telling people the 1 point thing. And so I could tell them, hey, don't listen to me. Listen to Eva too. She's saying the same thing, but your frameworks thing really helped me. I hadn't really thought that through much. I've always kind of just thought as step 1, step 2, step 3. I didn't know about the options. I love that you're obsessed with it. That's another thing we promote at the Imperfectionist podcast. So thank you for joining us. Check out Eva Daniel. I know her from LinkedIn. I'm sure she's on other social media as well. She's fantastic. Check out the book, Speak Different. This is our 3rd episode in our special series on Speak Different. We can't wait to see you again. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on this special edition of the Imperfectionist podcast focused on speaking different.